the first thing you'll notice about this speaker, at least first thing I notice, is this little hole right here. And I think that this is something hit this and pushed it in. And the reason I think that is because I can get behind that paper. And if I'm really gentle, I can pull that paper back out. Well, that's great, because then all I need to do is put some adhesive on it, and I'm not going to use any paper there because I don't need to. It's a nice rough edge on both. It's a tear, it's not a cut. So it's a nice rough edge. There's lots of fibers extending across the gap. And as long as I can get those fibers to knit back together with some adhesive, then I don't need to worry about strengthening it. And that's part of the flexible part of the surround. You know, this basically serves the same function as in a modern speaker with the foam surround. So I want to make sure that this area stays as flexible as possible. And if I put paper there and a bunch of adhesive, then this area is going to stiffen up and the speaker will not respond as well as if I kept it flexible. And then I'll do this tear here after this has cured up some, and I'll do this with the tacky glue, I think. Okay, this is what Eileen's tacky glue looks like. It comes in, I think you can get it in a smaller container, but I never do anything small, so I bought the 16 ounce of this. It's basically a gold bottle, and it's spelled Eileen's, A-L-E-E-N-E'-S, Eileen's Original Tacky Glue. The way I do it is I mix it ahead of time, and I'm going to mix it in this little jar so you can see. I've put about half of the jar's volume with just plain old water. I use warm water so that it dissolves the glue a little bit better. And I'm going to fill the rest of the jar, you know, most of the way up with the tacky glue. And you know what? I could squeeze and squeeze for the next half hour. I'm just going to pour it in this way. You'll notice that the tacky glue is kind of thick. Alright, this is why you want to dilute it. Alright, a little more. You just watch the level of the water as you pour the glue in, and you'll kind of know when you got the volume right. And then if you've left enough room in the jar, you can tweak it. You can dilute it a little further if you need to. Now do yourself a favor, don't leave that mess on the threads of your bottle when you close it. Wipe that off. That way next time you need to open the bottle, you can. Same thing with the inside of your cap. These are little things, guys, but they make life easier, trust me. Now, I usually will mix it in the container I'm going to keep it in, but I'm doing it in this little jar so that you can see me do it. I usually mix it with a screwdriver. You use your tool of choice. And I know I'm in glass, so I have to be careful, but then you just stir it up. And do it over a towel so you don't make it when you make a mess. This stuff is obviously water soluble. That's how I'm thinning it. So any mess you make, you'll be able to wash up. Now, what I usually do this stuff in is an old pill bottle, like so. And I'll put it in there and shake it until I get it the consistency I need, or at least I'll stir it most of the way and then shake it. That's about right. I want the drops to come off individually. It's sort of like mixing paint for a car. You want the drops to come off individually, and the size of the drops and how fast they come will tell you how thick it is. And that's about right, just like so. It actually looks like thin sour cream. Okay. Too much water and it'll spread real far in the speaker and make a mess, and too little water. You know what? I could use just a hair more water in this. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. I didn't bring water with me, so I'll do that off camera. I'm just going to raise it up. I'm probably going to add another, I don't know, 20 milliliters of water, something like that. I thinned it up just a little bit. Okay, it's about right. Like I said, it looks like thin sour cream. So I'm going to pour it in this little pill bottle. And then before this stuff dries in here, I'm going to go rinse this thing out. Let me cap this, and we'll come back. Let me go rinse that out, and then we'll come back and apply some glue to that speaker. Alright, jar is clean. I will tell you, if you don't rinse this, if you're planning to reuse your mixing container, if you don't rinse it out after you're done dumping it out of the mixing container, when it dries, you'll have a hell of a time getting it clean. So do it right away. Let's make sure this little tear is where I want it to be. So make sure I pull this up. There we go. I use small cheap paintbrushes for this. Nothing fancy. And just kind of wet it with it. Don't push too hard or you'll cause them to separate. And it'll look milky and messy, but it does soak into the paper and spread itself a little bit. But you want to kind of spread it relatively thinly, and don't just stop at the tear. Spread out a little bit. Alright, that's all I need for that. I'm going to let that sit, let that dry. I really want to be careful not to put too much on this section because that section needs to be as flexible as possible. So if you dry the brush and get some of this out of this little area in here, I don't need that much in there. There, I'm going to let that cure, and then I'll come back and touch it again. After that has cured and set, then I'll cut a piece of paper, and I don't cut them, by the way. I'll show you this when we do it, but you don't cut the paper, you tear it. You want lots of fibers extending beyond the edge so that they can knit with the adhesive and the paper that's there. So I'm going to tear some paper, and if I can, I can't really get to the back side on this, so I have to do it on this side. And I'll glue some paper down here, and I'll glue some paper down here. You know what? I'm going to touch that surround right there too. I try real hard to avoid putting paper on the surround because I find it distorts the sound a little bit. You just dampen it. At least the first time. Yeah, shoot. You just dampen it. You don't want to get it soaking. So if you do put too much on, you just dry your brush off and then wipe it lightly and it'll soak some of that back up. Let's let that sit, and we'll come back and take a look at it once it's dried a bit. Okay, this one right here, this first one I did is dried enough that I can put just a little more on there. Okay, while that's still wet, this one right here, I'm going to go ahead and put a little patch on. So you don't have to be real precise about this. You just tear off a little piece of paper, and you see how the edges are frayed. You want that. You want those little fibers sticking out because you're going to use those to knit to the rest of the radio, or you're going to use those fibers to knit to the speaker paper. Okay, they're both made of paper and they will knit together really well if you do this right. So go ahead and get that wet. You want to get a little more wet now, and you want to go a little farther out. You want to go beyond where you think the paper is going to be. Again, you're going to stay off the surround if you can. And then you want to just gently dampen the paper. You're going to get this on your fingers. Wear gloves if this kind of thing bothers you. Get that paper damp. Okay. Let it kind of absorb into the paper a bit. Now you have to handle that paper carefully. All right. Work kind of quickly. Don't hurry, but don't dawdle either. Now you don't want to lay the whole paper down at once. Start at one end or start in the middle, whatever you prefer. I'm going to start at one end on this one and kind of push it down with the brush. That'll get you into those little gaps, those little curves and crevices. See how I'm getting right into that little contour of the speaker? Kind of do that. Nice and easy. Don't get too excited. And if you can, brush toward the outside of the thing, so that will take those fibers that are on that paper and kind of extend them out as far as they'll go, and that'll add strength but yet retain flexibility. Okay, now I'm going to go beyond that little lip and work up here now. See, I didn't want to push it down until I got this lip kind of secured, and it's still tough. See, it doesn't want to lay down in that lip, but you got to kind of try and make it. There we go. Now, by the way, I didn't mention that this paper is a piece of coffee filter. See, my wife's a coffee drinker, so we have plenty of these around. That paper, for some reason, is really strong. Now, I wrapped up over the top of this surround, but as long as I don't span a couple of ridges, I'll be okay. This will still be flexible enough. I try to stay away from the surround, but sometimes the surrounds are bad enough that you have to get to them. It's just that if you don't have to, you shouldn't. Now, the key here, leave it alone for a bit. Now, I'm going to do this one later because I want to focus on one at a time. You may notice when you're doing this that the paper in the area seems to want to sag a little bit. The original cone paper will want to sag a little bit when it's wet. When it dries, it's like doing a model airplane. When you wet the paper, it sags. When it dries, it tightens back up. And that's what will happen with this speaker paper too. So don't worry about it. Just let it be. Don't mess with it. You haven't done anything to change it, so just let it be, let it dry, and it'll shrink back up. And if you don't put too much glue on there, it'll be pretty flexible. So the idea is small amounts of everything. All right, I'm going to go rinse my brush off, and we'll come back to it in a little while. We'll work on this one, and we'll finish up this one. This is nice and dry, so I'm going to put just a little more on it, but I am going to look underneath and see if I can get to it from underneath. No. Yeah, I can get to this part right here. You can kind of see that, and I might touch that up with a little bit of glue here. You won't see this very well, but let me go ahead and do this. Don't worry if you get too much on there. You just dry off your paintbrush and then you soak some of it up with your paintbrush. No big deal. The real worry when you have too much on there is the weight and having it distort the paper. So that should be enough right there. Let that dry for a few minutes before I apply any to the top side. I have this tear right here. What I want to do is I'm going to wet this in a minute. I'm going to tear off a piece of the tissue. I'm going to wet this. Then I'm going to stick the tissue to it. So let me close up my glue for just a minute and tear off a piece of tissue. And when I say tissue, I'm talking about coffee filter. This is not an exact thing because you want to tear it. You want, even if you have cut edges, it's best to grab it and pull it and tear it. And you see it leaves those little fibers extending out from the edge. And that is part of how it sticks, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, so it's a little big still. Cut it down a little. Okay, I don't need this right there. I think the shape might be better going this way. And cut off just a little more from the edge here. That's pretty good. I want to get that paper a little wet, or get the speaker paper a little wet here with the glue mix. And always kind of draw away from the tear so you don't accidentally go under the tear. Yikes. I guess I was looking at the wrong spot. So there we go. Usually any air bubbles that get in the glue while you're doing this will sort of pop as it soaks into the paper. It's not a big concern. Just a little extra where that tear is. All right. Now, I want to wet the paper with the glue, but I don't really necessarily have to wet the whole paper right now. Just get it started. It can be hard to work with when it's really wet. Go ahead and the glue won't hurt your finger. Okay. Now, take that paper, well, it's still pretty wet, and lay it down. You want to lay it down and kind of tap it down with the brush. Use the brush to kind of straighten it out and spread it out. It's not an exact science. There we go. I'll just pull the paper. It's still wet enough that it slides pretty easily. At some point it becomes difficult to slide. Okay, I want to try and tap it down into that contour. You see how I'm pulling away from the edges to keep those fibers nice and long. Alright, so now we're going to go up into this area here. It's a little tricky when you get into the surround. Now this surround has a pretty serious tear here, so I don't have any choice but to get to the surround. So you want to kind of tap it down into that contour. This glue will flex. This Aleene's tacky glue will flex as long as you don't pull it tight. It'll be flexible. So I kind of follow the contour by tapping it down with the brush. If you take your time, it'll work just fine. Okay, this little part right here in the middle wants to stick up, so I'm going to try and tap it down. There we go. Now the temptation is to fiddle with it a lot while you're doing this. But if you've ever put decals on a radio before you spray it with lacquer, you'll know that often the more you fiddle with stuff, the worse it gets. So you just kind of want to leave it be after you get certain fundamental things done. And the key with this surround is going to be use as little glue as possible on it because I want it to stay flexible. There. I'm just going to let that be now and let that dry for a couple of hours before I fool with it again. And then I'll do like I did on the other side. If I can get to it from the, like I did on this one right here, if I can get to it from the back side, I will. While I'm letting that dry, I might as well touch this here. It's had plenty of time now, and this is only going to need a little tiny bit. Just dampen it and spread it a little bit farther than you did before. Alright. You want a nice, smooth, and uneven transition from one layer to the other and from this area here to out into the cone. You want it to be gradual. Now this is just my way. You might have your way, and there's no saying that your way isn't a lot better than my way. I am a big fan of John from Arkansas. And as John always says, you are expected to do better. I always loved that. Okay. We're going to let those dry for a bit. And we'll come back to it shortly. Alright, we may struggle with focus here a little bit because I'm really close. I wanted you to see some detail. And so let me give this a shot. I want to show you the last coat. So I put 2 coats on this guy here and 1 coat right here. Let me see if I can put another coat on that second one. Real light coat. As you can see, it's not soaking in quite as fast because the previous coat has dried some. And that's usually a pretty good indicator that I'm nearly done. You'll see it changes color a little bit as it kind of reliquefies the glue underneath it and soaks in a bit more. I'm particularly concerned about this surround section right here. I need that to be flexible. All in all, you're using very tiny amount of glue. This that I'm putting on here is about 2/3 water, and I'm putting very small amounts on, so very little glue is actually getting on this speaker. Alright, real quick, I'm going to see if I can get to it underneath. You kind of see that tear just barely. Let's see if we can just touch it a little bit with some glue. A little hard to do it the way I like to do it, but that's okay. I just want to get a little bit of glue on it. It's no big deal. Alright guys, I think that's going to have to do it. And we'll see how it turns out, okay? The dial for this Admiral is about 1.5 inches tall by about 1 foot wide. And it's made of metal, and it is given its color, its surface, by using flocking on the area that you see through the dial window, the dial glass. Flocking, if you're not familiar with it, is a material that was used on the platters of old record players and gramophones. It's sort of a wool material that they adhere to the metal platter and gives it a nice soft texture, a nice place for the record to sit without scratching it. It looks real nice on dial plates. It's used a lot on a lot of different brands about this time. And it, if as long as it isn't tearing or coming off, rubbing off or wearing off, it looks real nice. About the only thing you have to worry about with flocking is that it will sometimes fade in color. That is, again, if it's still on there. If it's wearing off, well, then there are ways to fix that. But on this, it's just fading. The color is fading. So I'm going to go ahead and dress up the color on this, but I'm not going to do anything else with this flocking. What I'm going to use to dress up the color is some Perfect Brown toner. You can buy any brand you like, Mohawk. I prefer this Sherwin-Williams. It's good stuff. I think I'm not going to be able to get it anymore after I use up what I have, but I have enough to last me a while, so I'll go ahead and use it on this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask everything off that I don't want to get this stuff on. I'll back my camera up so I don't get the stuff on my lens, and then I'll go ahead and really lightly touch this flocking with the Perfect Brown, and that'll be all I need to do. So let me get it masked off, and we'll come back to it when I'm ready to spray. When you mask off the dial needle, because I really don't want to pull it off there, I want to leave it where it is, so I'm just going to mask it off. You make yourself a little tape sock, like so. That way it doesn't stick to the dial pointer and remove any of the paint. Okay, it's really simple to do. Just take a little strip of paper, stick it on the tape like that, okay? And then you're just going to take the tape and fold it over if you got 3 hands. What that does for you is it creates a little cylinder, okay? A little cylinder that you can then just slip over the dial pointer. See? No problem. Slip it right over, and then when you remove it, that paper will not stick to the dial pointer and it won't remove any paint off the dial pointer. Piece of cake. Nothing to it. Okay, nothing fancy is required here, guys. I just used a simple grocery bag and taped it in place. The ends of this thing aren't really going to be visible, so I'm not terribly concerned about it being perfect. What I want to do is just a real light touch to darken the color. So here we go. Let's test it. Okay. All right. So we are going to touch it one more time, and then we'll call it good. Keep your distance from it. You just want to mist it. Now I want to make sure I don't have a light colored stripe right there in the center, so we lift that off there, move this over. Yep, I would have. Good to put the dial pointer, if you're going to do it this way, to one extreme or the other. That way if you can't touch it up like I'm going to do here, well then that little mark there will be on one end of the dial, will be hard to see. We'll let that dry, and we'll see what we get. Now when that sits behind the window, that thing will really pop. I was going to try and touch up that dial, but now there's plenty of contrast. That dial's going to look real nice against that background. And if I paint it too bright a white, well, then it's going to look too new. It won't look quite right. I like this off-white. It's going to be just about perfect for it. Okay, we're pulling the masking off of this newly refreshed dial backplate, and I think it looks pretty good. What do you guys think? It doesn't look too bad, huh? Well, alright guys, I'm just past 30 minutes, so that's about all the time I have for today's. Tune in next time as we reassemble this chassis, and then we'll get to work on the record player. Ooh, that sounds fun. Alright, so on Tuesday, June the 13th, from your Western Outpost in Salt Lake City, this is Michael. That's all for now.